Как вы считаете, чего Москве удалось добиться за последние 2 года и каким образом положить конец боевым действиям?
Я вам, как представителю Соединенных Штатов, могу сказать то, что когда-то сказал господину Байдену. Он мне когда-то прислал письмо, я ему в письменном виде ответил. Если вы хотите прекратить боевые действия на Украине, перестаньте поставлять оружие.
Friends, today we have a very hot material for analysis. Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin put the American journalist at a dead end, literally with one question, and then asked him to convey his words to Grandpa Biden. The issue promises to be interesting, but we will not delay the introduction. We are starting. This episode begins with the words of an American journalist who asked Putin, quote, "Thank you very much for the opportunity to apply. President Putin, a few years ago you sent Russian troops to Ukraine, stating that your goal was to protect Russian-speaking citizens, including those living in Donbass, as well as to ensure the security of Russia's eastern border. Since then, thousands of people have died on both sides of the conflict, and the fighting has spread even to some Russian regions. Recently, Western officials confirmed that Ukraine had used Western weapons on Russian territory. Do you consider this an additional provocation? The question is, what has Russia managed to achieve over the past 2 years, and how can we put an end to the fighting?" Putin takes the floor and answers, quote, "As a representative of the United States, I will tell you a little secret. I already told Mr. Biden once when he sent me a letter. In my written response, I noted, if you really want to end the fighting in Ukraine, stop supplying weapons. The conflict will end in a few months at most. But a rhetorical question arises. What prevents Russia and Ukraine from signing a peace agreement? I assume that it is beneficial for someone to achieve their goals in the Russian direction of foreign policy, striving at any cost to achieve the destruction of Russia or its strategic defeat. The first thing we did was to fulfill our duty to the people who suffered from the coup in Ukraine and the subsequent fighting in the east of the country. We have recognized the right of these people to protect their interests, their lives, and the lives of their children. This, in my opinion, is the main one. We have shown that we are not only talking about protecting our interests, but also acting, and we will continue to act, and this will have to be taken into account. As for the second part of your question about the cessation of hostilities in Ukraine, I can say that I once replied to Mr. Biden in a letter. If you want to stop fighting in Ukraine, stop supplying weapons. These actions will cease within 2, maximum 3 months. That's it. Secondly, we urge not to interfere in the restoration of the negotiation process. Dear Mr. Jordan, I will remind you what happened at the end of 2022. We agreed with Ukraine on our readiness to sign an agreement that dealt with several key issues. For Ukraine, it was a matter of the security system. In the draft agreement, Ukraine consolidated its neutral status, refusing to join NATO, but with a guarantee of ensuring its security, similar to Articles 4 and 5 of the NATO Charter. This implied that the signatories of the agreement would be obliged to provide Ukraine with assistance, including military assistance, in the event of a threat. This was a difficult issue for Russia. I said that such details need to be discussed, but it is possible. Russia is interested in the neutral status of Ukraine, its non-entry into military blocs and arms limitation, and this corresponded to our interests. In addition, we raised the issue of denazification. Some asked what it meant. This is a ban on propaganda of Nazism at the legislative level. Surprisingly, there was a common platform here, as well as on other key issues that are necessary for a peaceful settlement. It is important to note that the head of the Ukrainian negotiating group signed excerpts from this large agreement. This means that, in general, these conditions satisfied the Ukrainian side. And if we accepted it, it means that Russia was also satisfied with it. However, I have to ask a rhetorical question. Why did Mr. Johnson come to Kiev and recommend throwing this agreement in the trash? After all, it could become the basis for a peaceful settlement. Why did Mr. Johnson set a goal for his Ukrainian colleagues to achieve victory on the battlefield and the strategic defeat of Russia? Ukrainian officials themselves have publicly stated that if the agreement had been signed, the war would have stopped at the end of 2022. We didn't say that, they said it in Kiev. So why was it necessary to prevent the signing of this agreement? I can only assume that it was beneficial for someone to achieve their goals in the Russian direction of foreign policy, to bring the matter to the destruction of Russia, to its strategic defeat. Perhaps it was for this very reason that the possibility of a peaceful settlement was thwarted. Therefore, I hope my answer was sufficiently detailed. If you have the opportunity to talk with the leadership of your country, ask them, why did you prevent the conclusion of a peace treaty between Russia and Ukraine? What I said is my guess. Maybe there is another, more official answer. But I can't speak for colleagues from the USA or the UK. However, I am convinced that Mr. Johnson's actions were not only his personal initiative, but were also carried out with the support of the US administration. I have no doubt about that. The end of Putin's quote. Vladimir Putin paid special attention to the moment when Russia and Ukraine were close to concluding a peace agreement at the end of 2022. He said that a draft agreement had been prepared that addressed the most important issues for both sides, including Ukraine's neutrality and the ban on its joining NATO. According to Putin, the Russian side was ready to discuss these issues, albeit with reservations regarding Russia's security. This statement is of key importance because it confirms that at the beginning of the conflict, Russia was really looking for a peaceful settlement, as it publicly stated. Ukraine's neutrality and its refusal to join NATO have become the most important conditions for preventing a large-scale war. However, the intervention of Western states, including the United States and Great Britain, did not allow Kyiv to agree to these conditions. Putin mentions with obvious irritation Boris Johnson's visit to Kyiv, which, according to him, demanded that the Ukrainian authorities abandon the peace agreement, which was a turning point that prolonged the fighting. This point raises an important question. Why were Russia's efforts for a peaceful settlement rejected? Putin argues that if Ukraine had signed this agreement, the war could have ended at the end of 2022, which would have prevented the deaths of thousands of people. In this context, Putin raises a rhetorical question. Why did Boris Johnson interfere in the peace process and destroy the negotiations? This statement is aimed at emphasizing the role of the West in the escalation of the conflict and calls into question the real motives of Western countries, which, despite statements of support for Ukraine, might not want a quick end to the war if it threatened their strategic interests. Putin is resolving the issue of cessation of hostilities not through diplomatic efforts, but through a demand to stop foreign aid to Ukraine. This highlights the main line of Russian foreign policy. For Russia, Ukraine has become not just a country, but an arena of struggle for geopolitical security, where the intervention of external forces is seen as a threat to Russian sovereignty and national security. Putin also raised the issue of denazification, arguing that it should have included a ban on propaganda of Nazism and discrimination at the legislative level. This demand was supported by Ukraine during the negotiations, which, according to the Russian president, testified to Ukraine's readiness for an agreement. However, the intervention of the West has again disrupted the settlement process, which calls into question the real goals of external intervention in Ukraine. Thus, Putin's response to questions from Western journalists demonstrates not only Russia's position on Ukraine, but also its strategic approach to international relations in the context of global confrontation. Russia aims to restore its interests, but at the same time remains open to peace talks that have been disrupted by external interference. Security and territorial integrity issues remain a priority, and its responses to Western sanctions and interventions continue to underscore its determination to defend its interests by any means necessary. And just yesterday, the friends of the United States made an unexpected statement towards Russia. The world of diplomacy is rarely predictable, but when the United States makes an unexpected move towards Russia, it attracts the attention of the whole world. This time, as if Washington decided to tone down its rhetoric and sent Moscow a signal that many perceived as a diplomatic gesture. What are the motives of the American administration, and how will Moscow react to these changes? In the morning, the world media reported that representatives of the U.S. State Department made a statement emphasizing the importance of dialogue with Russia. It spoke about Washington's readiness to negotiate on key issues: security, energy policy, and conflict resolution. This statement was made against the background of growing tensions in international relations, where sanctions, information wars, and military rhetoric have become an integral part of the interaction between the two countries. And suddenly the United States takes a step back, offering to establish cooperation. Why is this important? In recent years, the United States has taken a tough stance towards Russia, accompanied by sanctions and accusations. This gave the impression of an irreconcilable confrontation, but now the situation has begun to change. How did Russia react? Moscow is known for its pragmatism and has chosen to refrain from harsh statements. Presidential spokesman Dmitry Peskov noted that Russia is always open to dialogue if it is based on mutual respect. Vladimir Putin stressed that any changes in U.S. policy would be assessed on the basis of their deeds, not words, adding that Russia was ready to cooperate, but not on the terms of an ultimatum. What is behind the U.S. diplomatic gesture? Many experts agree that the United States decided to tone down its rhetoric for a reason. Let's look at several possible reasons. Energy crisis. After the imposition of sanctions against Russian energy carriers, the United States faced rising oil and gas prices, which caused economic stress. Washington is probably looking for a compromise to stabilize the situation in the energy market. Competition with China. Cooperation between Russia and China is becoming a serious threat to the United States, and the American administration may be trying to weaken this alliance. Internal problems. The Biden administration has faced criticism from within the country, which forces it to seek diplomatic successes to strengthen its position on the international stage. What to expect in the future? This diplomatic step may mark the beginning of a new era in relations between Russia and the United States. But there are also doubts about the sincerity of Washington's intentions. If the United States is really ready to compromise, this could lead to sanctions relief and stabilization of the international situation. However, perhaps Washington is just trying to buy time or continue weakening Russia through negotiations. For this situation, I have a good Scottish proverb, friends. If two neighbors quarreled, it means that an Englishman visited one of them last night. It seems to me that the U.S. diplomatic step towards softening its rhetoric towards Russia may indicate America's real concern about the global situation. The energy crisis caused by the sanctions not only hit Russia, but also significantly complicated the situation of their allies in Europe, which obviously does not go unnoticed in Washington. In addition, China's growing role in the international arena and the strengthening of its alliance with Russia are probably perceived as a serious threat to American influence. This pressure may force the United States to look for ways to ease tensions with Russia in order to somehow weaken this alliance. On the other hand, I doubt the sincerity of the U.S. intentions. Washington's policy has always been flexible, and history shows that decisions made under the influence of short-term economic and political circumstances can change quickly. Russia needs to be careful not to trust such proposals without clear, concrete steps on the part of the United States. Rhetoric about readiness for negotiations is just words that do not matter much if there are no real actions behind them aimed at lifting sanctions or easing pressure. In this situation, it is important for Russia to keep its cool and make it clear that it is ready to negotiate only on equal terms. It is necessary to use this moment to strengthen our positions in the international arena, while continuing to develop alliances with countries such as China and India. It is important that Moscow does not succumb to possible provocations and does not take hasty steps. In diplomacy, as in life, one should not rush, especially when it comes to strategically important issues. Thank you for your attention. Write your opinion and do not forget to subscribe to the channel. See you, friends.